Hello, and welcome to Writer's Lunch, y'all. Happy to have you today in the middle of August, and if you're anywhere in the continental United States, I am so sorry for the weather, unless you happen to be in Seattle or Maine or something, in which case, you get the better weather, and we are all dying. My crops, they are dying.
Roasting.
Today, we're happy to have a talk by Daphne Strasert, on Isekai, and it will include lots of definitions. So if you're not familiar, totally, so get you back up to speed on what that means. But also, I love the idea of making such a blanket statement. And so we want to hear about how this applies to everything in writing.
Everything.
Daphne, let me toss it over.
Everything. It's like everything is cake. But before we get started, Sean, you are hosting Writer's Lunch next week. What is up for next week?
Yes. So next week we are doing oddities, mistakes, and curiosities that have brought us to where we are today in novels, in reading and writing. So the way you can think of it is weird conspiracies that have created this modern world where we are today with what is a novel? Why is it written like that? All sorts of different ways that influences that are not relevant became so important, and I've really enjoyed the research for it. It's terribly interesting to go back to the 1600s, look at the ancient Greeks, talk about things that happened in the 20th century involving the CIA, and why we're here today with novels. Also in the chat, I'm going to toss up as well, I was talking earlier today to a Houstonian who is from Hawaii, and I'm going to toss up a link to an organization that is raising money for Lahaina in Maui. I'm pointing the wrong direction. I have a map of it right here because we went there.
Very cool. Okay, well, let's get into everything is Isekai, which we're going to start off, with definitions. What is this? If you have not heard the term before, you have, I'm sure, heard of the concept. Isekai as a term is a Japanese term. It means other world, and it deals with literature in which a character is transported from one world into another. It's been a theme in traditional Japanese literature for a very, very long time, but in the last 10 years, the number of manga and anime particularly manga, that have been produced using the Isekai plot element has just skyrocketed. So this is just a graph for manga, but also in webcomics, in just fantasy in general. It's become very popular lately. As I mentioned, it means other world, and a character is transported into the other world. It can be a fantasy world, it can be a virtual world, or it can even be the same world just at a different point in time. So popular examples, particularly from Japan, include Inuyasha, more recently Sword Art Online, and very infamously, The Time I Got Reincarnated as a Slime. And what these are generally, the Sword Art Online is a show about people who went into a VR game and got trapped there, and then were living out their lives in this VR game. Inuyasha is a fantasy story where Kagome, our main character, is transported back in time to medieval Japan in a time where there were demons and monsters, and is on a quest there. And then The Time I Got Reincarnated as a Slime is a contemporary isekai where they are brought back to life after death as a sentient slime. It's just all in the title right there.
Yeah, let me throw this about there, because if you like fantasy, That Time I Got Reincarnated is hilarious. And also, like the old Final Fantasy games, the first monster you always fought was a slime, and it had like one hit point. So the implication is he is the lowest of the low, the smallest monster he could ever be, and will get killed immediately afterwards. Oh, but wait, there's a twist. It's a great twist.
So obviously these books deal often in the sci-fi, in the speculative genre. It is a type of speculative fiction, but I am going to stick with my blanket statement, and I will argue everything is isekai, even non-fantasy elements. But the fantasy elements are fun, and so we're going to spend some time talking about them. Yes, Anna.
Okay, I have a question, and I might be jumping the gun on this because I see you're moving on to variations of isekai next. So my question is there a difference between isekai and portal fantasy? And if so, what is it?
We are going to talk about that.
Okay, good.
But we're going to talk about some of the fun elements of isekai and the variations that you can see. I am going to be using a lot of Japanese and Korean examples because I'm very passionate about that, and they're very good forms of fiction. And so we're going to talk about those as well. But we're also going to talk about how this relates to, as Anna just pointed out, portal fantasy and fantasy in general, and in more broader terms. But let's have some fun first. So a common theme, there's a few ways to get to your other world when it comes to portal fantasies. One is a physical portal, a door that you walk through, a bridge that you cross over, a forest that you wander into. You can physically transport yourself into the other world, or you can die. And dying is an extremely common way of getting into the other world, particularly in Asian isekai stories. So common, in fact, that people have created a character around it. Now, when you die and are reincarnated in an isekai, it is usually a sudden or violent death. You're not dying of old age in your home surrounded by your grandchildren. You are often run over by a truck. And so Truck-kun became the truck that hits people to send them to an isekai world became so popular, it became its own character. So that's why we have Truck-kun sitting here.
Is kun, kun is a diminutive for
so in Japanese, specifically it's a Japanese one. In Japanese, there are affixes, I guess, is the honorifics. Honorifics are added to basically everyone's name. Unless you know someone very, very well, you're going to refer to them with an honorific. Kun is a fairly informal honorific that refers to a boy or like a childhood friend man.
Yeah.
I had to toss into the chat a link to Christine by Stephen King, the sentient car that kills people.
There you go, Truck-kun and Christine. But yeah, so Truck-kun is a very just like affectionate way of referring to this truck that kills everyone in these portal or these. Yeah, so you die and you come back, maybe as a slang. But there's a couple ways you can come back. You can go back as yourself, right? You might be transported into the other world and be yourself. Often in these cases, these are more the portal fantasies where you like step through a door. Something about yourself that is common in our world will be very uncommon in other worlds. So if you have black hair in our world, that's fairly normal. In the other world, that is extremely abnormal. And so it sets you apart in this other world right off from the bat. Or you might transport into the other world and you are no longer yourself. You are now someone from that world. And this would be the possession trope. You're inhabiting someone that is native to the world, already has a life story. You're not being born as them. You are waking up suddenly in their body. You often retain all of the knowledge of your former life, but you don't have any. You may have some of their memories, but you don't have any of the memories of the person that you're inhabiting. So we are learning about the world through the character as the character is learning about the world themselves.
May I ask for a small plot summary of Shall We Bathe Your Grace? Because I don't know this one.
Okay, we're going to get plot summaries of all of these. So Shall We Bathe Your Grace is a great story. Our heroine in her previous life made jokes about, these isekais are so unrealistic because everyone would smell, no one would bathe as often, they wouldn't have the cleanliness that we have. And so when she dramatically dies and is transported into another world, she is transported into a world where, yes, everybody smells because no one bathes, no one brushes their teeth, no one cleans up like the dog poop in the yard. Like it's just smelly all the time. The love story rom-com element of this is that she meets a duke who is also obsessed with bathing, and he is the only person that she can get close to without wanting to gag. And so she proposes to him as soon as she meets him, just saying it like, I have to marry this man. This is the only person I can spend the rest of my life with because he's the only person I can stand.
This is such a low bar for men. Just bathe.
But I love this because is this like, you know, I don't know who it's directed to as far as the age level and stuff like that, but like, please bathe, you know, like this is a you know, like an instructional thing. You would say it's for middle schoolers, but as Shannon says, could be for all ages.
Yeah, yes, Anne?
No, thanks for giving the link.
So what I like about Shall We Bathe Your Grace is that a lot of isekais have become very self-referential. The character that has been transported knows what happened. They got isekai'd into this world. They often have read those sort of fantasies themselves and know what's going on when they're getting transported into this. And so when you talk about, particularly in webcomics and manga, there is very little attention paid to the mechanics of getting to the world. It's just assumed. We're just getting straight to the fun part, which is interacting with the new world. We're not going to worry about why exactly this is going on. Well, it's just enough to say, I'm in a new world. Related to, excuse me.
I'm doing that. I have a very easy way to get there. They just listen to a record. Is that all right?
Yeah. That's actually a really unique one.
That's a great example of like just transporting you away and how the everything is isekai totally works.
So related to possession is when a character is inhabiting the other world is actually a world they already know. For example, like a book they were reading or a show they were watching. They are familiar with the cast and characters and often have an idea of what's going to happen to them. Early on in isekai, they would transport into the world and they would be a chosen one, or they would be the main character. Because it's gotten so self-referential now, they've started playing with this, where there may be a side character that gets killed off very early on, or they might be the villain, which is a fairly popular trope. And that's what the plot of I've Become a True Villainess is. She dies very suddenly, is transported into the world of a novel that she had read, and she knows that she is the villain and that she dies horribly at the end of the book. And so she's setting out to change her fate by acting differently, making different choices than the character in the book had made. And we get to see the interplay of the story trying to reassert itself around her, trying to still force her to be the villain. And so like her attempts involve, she ends up getting engaged to one of the love interests for the main like love triangle. It's a big mess, and it's a lot of fun. I like the familiar world trope because it offers so many opportunities for you to talk about both knowing who your character is, who they're supposed to be, and really trying to like inhabit both being yourself and inhabiting this new person that you know what happens to them. Second chance. This is usually combined with time travel for necessary reasons. The character is transported within their own world into the past in order to redo their life with a little bit better knowledge of what happens to them the first time around. And so they can prevent disaster or not. Again, the story tries to reassert itself around them. And so in this case, Groundhog Day. I put up My Sweet Enemy, Thy Name is Husband. Our main character dies on the day of her wedding. She's assassinated as she is marrying the emperor of a rival nation. And so when she is assassinated, she finds herself waking up years ago before she even knew of this guy. And she is trying to avoid her own death and the ruin of her kingdom that it causes by making new decisions, making different choices, and somehow still ends up married to the man that she was assassinated for. It's a good read. It's more drama, a little drama-filled one. All right. Slow Life, one of my absolute favorite subgenres of isekai. All right, the transported character was overworked in their previous life and decides that they are going to just enjoy themselves in the story going forward. For example, Savor the Taste. A character who was always working at an office, eating frozen meals, blah, 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 is transported or dies of overwork, goes into the new world and decides that she's just going to eat everything. Just eat. She's going to eat the entire time she's there. This is a variation of the known world because she is in a story and she knows that her character gets killed off fairly soon. So she is just like, well, I'm going to die anyway. Might as well eat. She becomes a very good cook, and her cooking actually saves her from her original horrible death. And she ends up working for the villain, Savor the Taste. Because these characters are not interested in engaging with the plot at all, they're not trying to change their fate, they're just trying to enjoy themselves, the plot usually comes out and drags them along with it. There's things that happen where they're meeting characters who are way more important than they were, but they shouldn't be, but they are, and now they're involved in politics and plot and meeting the main characters in ways that they maybe never were supposed to. These are very cozy reads, and they're typically very humorous.
Okay, but why does this sound like just every week for me? Like I'm just trying to do nothing, and then everything just drags me along. I got to do work. I got to do that. I got to walk the dogs.
It's relatable. All right. And then the reverse isekai. which is someone from a strange other world gets pulled into ours. The devil is a part-timer, pretty much what its title says, but you have a guy working part-time at a burger shack that is actually the devil, been brought over into our world. It's a silly little mashup of other things from his world keep following him in, and then these fairly ordinary people are trying to fight them off. We get to watch someone who is very strange struggle to adjust to what we consider very normal. These are usually pretty funny or humorous stories. Hafsa says, in all of these types of isekai, is knowing their future / fate a must? Not necessarily, but it does add an element of tension to the story that otherwise doesn't exist. In the stories where you have time travel or where the character is already familiar with the world, I think that there is a need to have them remember things, maybe misremember things at the same time, especially if your character is transported to the world of a book they read 10 years ago. They might not remember it all or even accurately, which can cause more problems in their plot. So I would say that in some cases it's necessary for to actually move the plot along, because if a character travels back in time and doesn't remember anything from their previous life, are they actually going to make different decisions?
Can I bring this up from a time I got reincarnated, which is that it's like a person who lives in our life and let's say works in an office and does middle management. So when he goes to this fantasy world, everybody's having problems, and he brings this logic that's like of our world of like, how do I solve problems or, do paperwork and stuff like that to the problems in his world. So everybody thinks that he is both a genius and also like somewhat can see into the future of what's going to happen, but it's just having a different set of tools that comes to it. And oftentimes a lot of isekai, the person who comes, has some extra power, but also often it's just how we in this life we have act, and that becomes its own superpower. Like, Superman has superpowers on a different planet.
Yeah, I mean, if you're transported to a medieval fantasy world, your knowledge of simply being able to read, but even just basic high school knowledge would be considered really impressive.
You can make a ramp. You can, how to use a hammer,
how to do CPR, which is something that wasn't invented until the 1940s. And so you can see that just being from our world is in its own sense a superpower. So how does isekai fit into the literary world? We're going to start off by talking about Farah Mendelssohn's fantasy framework.
Okay.
Farah Mendelssohn came up with a framework for fantasy novels, saying that all fantasy novels fit within these 4 types. A portal fantasy, which Anna mentioned earlier, in which a character from our normal world is transported into a fantastical world. The intrusive, where something fantastical is transported into our ordinary world, also called a reverse isekai. The immersive, which is where your story is taking place entirely within the new world. And then the liminal, where things from our normal world and things from the fantastical world are both existing in a third middle space somewhere in between them. So I would consider portal, intrusive, and liminal all isekais. Immersive, not so much, because you're not dealing with someone who is looking at a new world or new situation. So for some examples of what this actually looks like using Ghibli, Spirited Away is a portal fantasy. We take a normal girl and transport her into the world of spirits. Ponyo is intrusive. A mermaid spirit essentially is transported into our world and is trying to keep themselves there. Howl's Moving Castle exists entirely within the fantasy world that is created there. And My Neighbor Totoro, in which this woods space is kind of a meeting place for our normal little girl and these fantastical creatures. I actually really enjoy this framework. I think it's really a nice way of breaking things down for speculative fiction, but you are going to see a lot of things that fall just into immersive categories. But more broader than that, let's talk about the hero's journey. The hero's journey is a breakdown of storytelling. It is something that a lot of people use when structuring their books, it's a way of plotting. And it was argued by Joseph Campbell, that every story fits somehow into this framework. And you'll notice as part of the diagram, we start off in the ordinary world, and at some point in the story, we cross over into the special world. Now, this hero's journey does not just apply to fantasy stories or speculative fiction stories. It applies to all stories. And this idea of a special world is a new situation that they are finding themselves in, because that's what drives the tension of a story, is your characters are facing a new and novel situation. That is what makes your story compelling. And I would argue that's why everything is isekai, because you have this idea of you're taking your character out of what they know and giving them new challenges and new things to do, and they have to learn and change and grow. I would consider that them crossing over into another world.
I think it's interesting to note that this was exactly the pattern that was used to create the first Star Wars movie, which is now Star Wars 3. You can trace each one of the things that happened. Some things that happened in the movie don't seem to make sense in this context of the movie, but they do make sense in the context of this diagram, where where Luke goes into the cave, to confront whatever was in the cave. That didn't seem to fit so much, but it fits here.
Yeah, a lot of people use Star Wars to actually teach the hero's journey because it follows it so closely. I find J and K fiction to follow these plot points? So do I find the Japanese and Korean fiction follows this plot points? They don't. There is a different history of storytelling involved in other cultures, and the hero's journey is extremely Eurocentric, Western-centric. And so a lot of the stories that I'm talking about are written serially, which I know that Ian gave a talk about serial fiction a couple weeks ago, and how it's structured differently and how plot points work differently. And so a lot of manga and webcomics are written serially, and so they don't follow a traditional structure that a novel would. And so no, I have not seen that in those sorts of fiction. Let's play a game. We're going to talk about, is it isekai? So this is audience participation. I obviously have my own thoughts, but we can argue about whether or not something is isekai. So let's start off strong. The Wizard of Oz.
Of course.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say yes.
Tornado portal.
It's a tornado portal, yeah. It's all just a dream portal.
And she meets all the people that are from her daily life as well. So in terms of your subcategories, it's a twisted version, but it's all versions of people that she already knew.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Except for the wizard himself, who also came from our world.
I'm going to throw this in as well. Return to Oz, a deep cut, pretty good, early 90s movie.
There's also been some political analysis for each one of the characters that made sense in the context of when it was written.
Oh, I have heard about that. It is really interesting to look at.
Yes, it sure is.
There's a lot of Oz books.
Alice in Wonderland.
Well, this is just down the rabbit hole.
And Through the Looking Glass.
Yeah.
Very literal portals in this one. Chronicles of Narnia.
For sure.
Another very literal portal, walking through a closet into another world.
Or through a picture in The Voyage of the Dawn Treader. That's another one of the series.
Moving on to more conversational. Let's talk about Harry Potter. Now, he kind of physically travels, but he is always still within Earth.
Yeah, I think this one for me is a little bit different than the previous examples because the magical world and the non-magical world exist in parallel together, even though, Harry Potter didn't notice it until he became part of the magical world. It's like there are witches and wizards and, magical things all around him, even when he's not at Hogwarts.
Okay, now I want to relate this to both Matrix and Fight Club. The way that you just described it, AP.
What kind of club?
Fight Club?
Fight
Club.
Thank you.
I mean, yeah, it is all around him, but for him, it didn't exist. It didn't exist until he is told about it.
Well, then he is told about it, and now he knows about it wherever he goes. When he's with the Muggles, he still knows that he has magic.
Is
He's
it
just
not
supposed to do it?
I'm sorry. Is it not immersive in some way because they do live in the same world, interact with each other? The only difference is that the society, like the wizard society, just keeps themselves shut off from the rest of the world.
I mean, in some cases, I would consider it almost liminal. You know, you have spaces like Diagon Alley or the Leaky Cauldron that exist in our world, but also not in our worlds because of the way that it works.
And Hogwarts is big time like that.
I would consider Hogwarts another world because it's so isolated and so immersive with just magic.
I feel like this one would not be, and it's because he is supposed to fit in. He is one of them. He was in the wrong world to begin with. And the story doesn't rely on his differences, but his sameness to this world and his inclusion to that world and his importance to that world. Like, he is a key part of how that dynamic, that world works. Like, without him, Voldemort couldn't win. Like, he's a key element to this world functioning, or at least the Nemesis's plan for the world.
But he is still having to like learn about what the world is new to him.
Yeah. But it seems like a lot of the other things that you have put in here has almost been like the end goal. And I know this is not everything, but like, say, Alice in Wonderland or the Oz story, like the goal is to go back to normal, to get back to your normal world. Harry Potter never wants to go back to the normal world, except for like fleeting moments in the stories where he's just like, man, I wish there was a magic. But like, his end goal has nothing to do with being, you know, that kicked kid underneath the stairs.
Right. And he's
I don't think going back to normal has to be a element of it.
It's just that he from the very first time he stepped on a broom, he knew how to fly without even any instruction.
I'm loving this discussion, by the way. There is no right or wrong answer.
But I mean, I think I just, the fact that he is so much of this world, even if he didn't know about it, and like almost everything else you said, you're like, oh, I'm so different. And his thing is like, oh, I'm learning how to be the same. And perhaps this is because I don't read a ton of the anime. Maybe there's more where they do accept it, but his goal seems to become more of that world and less of his original world. And like, I'm thinking of other things too, like Outlander, where, you know, there is the same sort of goal for the main character in many of the books of just like staying where she was or getting back to Jamie after she accidentally transports back to now times. But like the differences between Harry Potter and the world that he comes into become smaller and smaller over time. Like he loses that like muggle kind of sensibility over time and fully embraces the new world, which I feel like in a lot of the Portal stuff, there's no full embrace.
I agree with Shannon. He was born into the magical world and he was put into the world of his aunt and uncle and cousin, but he never belonged there. He was always alien in the so-called normal world.
But wouldn't you say that he's like, this book is the classic hero's journey as well, in which the thing that makes him special is the fact that he comes from that other world? Do you know what I mean? Like, even say Lord of the Rings, the end goal for the hero is that the adventure will be over and I will now live a peaceful life doing whatever, you know, they want to do. So it's like the thing that makes him special is why makes, God, what am I trying to say? I'm saying that the thing that makes them special is from the other, that they were raised in the other world, and now they're coming to this new like place that they've never come before. And the only thing with Harry Potter is like they were waiting for him, right? Like the wizarding world was sort of waiting for that one hero that's going to come, and he had no idea who he was. So it feels a little bit like characters who come from one world to another don't fit in right away. Would you call that a portal, or would you just say that's like the hero's journey in general?
I would call it a portal. I know other people don't agree, but that's my argument is always going to be that I think it is a portal because of exactly what you said. He doesn't have the knowledge of this other world until he is thrust into it. But regardless of like where he came from in it, like if he came from it.
He picks it up so fast. It's natural to him.
I think though, because like all of the learning that Harry has to do about the quote magical world is just learning secrets about the world that he's lived in the whole time. So I wouldn't think that, having to uncover secrets about the world he's always lived in is necessarily a portal.
And all the kids at Hogwarts are learning stuff about how to do magic. They all need to learn. This is his natural world.
Can you imagine what it would have been like for him if he didn't have his two companions? If he'd gone to Hogwarts by himself, it'd have been a total failure, But Hermione saved his butt lots of times.
Yeah.
Hermione would have done it in 4 books. So Emily in the chat, Emily and Isabella talking about the worlds don't overlap. Do they overlap? He speaks to it like there's elements of the isekai. I agree, Emily. But let's go on to our next one, which I feel like I'm going to lose more and more of you as we go through this. It's going to be great. The Odyssey.
His whole book is a journey, except right at the very end.
I will absolutely call this one isekai.
You will?
I would. I absolutely would. It's a boat portal.
Boat portal.
But it's for the same reason. Like, the whole goal is to get home, right? Well, it's go to war and then get home if you're considering the Iliad as well. But like when they get to essentially dealing with the magical stuff in the world outside of their general like home area and having to deal with the magic and trying to survive the magic of this otherness, like the goal again is to just get home, is to get away from it. And it is so different.
But there's something special about it. He's telling this whole story. You don't know if any of it ever happened. He's here on this island and they're just going to get him just a short distance away from his home, and they say, who are you and where you come from? And he spins this whole long story about all these magical adventures, and he just says that. We don't know that any of it happened.
Let me throw this out there as well, which is there's Greece, there's Troy, which is Turkey today, and then this happens in between on the way home. But like both of those places, Greece and Troy, the gods are separate from what's going on. So although they offer to the gods, yada, yada, nothing ever appears that's magical. So the whole Odyssey in the middle is Isekai because he's going to a place where he directly interacts with fantastic beings.
Well, I'm going to disagree a little bit on that one because there is God influence in the Iliad, just not to the characters that are in the Odyssey, if I remember correctly.
I just said. Yeah.
No, but the characters in the Iliad, the gods do directly influence them. And so the impact of the gods is like second degree to the characters that are in the Odyssey. Like they know about it. They're aware of it. They're impacted by it in the Iliad. But they aren't like handed special shoes and shit like other people are.
I'm going to agree with Isabella and also bring up Anna's argument from the last one, which is, but isn't it technically all the same world? Is he really going to a new world or is it just a new situation?
But did he ever go anyway? He's just telling it. We don't know if any of it happened.
We have to presume he is an honest narrator.
No, he's very clever. He makes up lies all the time. That is his great strength, his clever lies. Athena admires him for this. By the way, Athena does meet him on Ithaca, and she meets Telemachus, his son, also. So it's not totally godless.
I still feel like under normal circumstances, they do not have day-to-day, like they are aware of gods and supernatural creatures, but they do not have day-to-day interactions with them until they are on the way back, until they leave home. And so once they leave home and they go to war and they're on their way back, like that is the point at which the gods truly start to impact them. And then their process of trying to get home puts them in situations and places they have never been before, with creatures they have never dealt with before. And the whole goal is to get the fuck away. I feel like this is Portal, and I understand like they're technically in the same world, but we're also talking about antiquity. So it's a totally different place, even if you go like 40 miles from where you were born. Like it's a different kind of circumstance for them.
Yeah, in their attitude, they might think that Turkey is another magical place.
I think this concept of magic back in those times was really the fact that they didn't understand a lot of what was going on in the natural world. Like the whirlpool, for instance. There is a natural occurrence of whirlpools, and they thought it was some kind of supernatural occurrence. Things like that.
Now, the many-headed monster that eats people that right next to the whirlpool is, less of a natural occurrence.
Yeah, Sharbatus. I always like the name.
All right. The next one.
Well, I want to see, I like Shan's take on this because she's like, no, he's a liar and a murderer and an unreliable narrator. And I'm like, you're not wrong. Like the way that I read it is straightforward, but all of those things are also true.
I'm gonna have to reread it with eye toward unreliable narrator. All right. The Hunger Games. Fight.
Did I ever read that?
No, I don't think it's a portal.
Isn't that immersive?
I mean, I'm going to argue that it is a portal because Katniss is put into a new and novel situation that she has absolutely no like training for. I guess she's seen it before.
I know the whole point of this is that everything is isekai, but I'm gonna say if you say that being put into a new situation where you have to learn new skills makes something an isekai, then everything would be isekai.
Exactly.
And I don't agree with that definition because I think that be like all fiction is about being put into a character being put into a new situation where they have to learn new skills and do new things to survive or get out of it. And I don't agree that that's the same as isekai.
I understand.
Hunger Games is double isekai. It is class isekai. All of a sudden, she's got to deal with all these rich people and stuff like that. And then inside of that is the fight game.
But this is the world that she's lived in the whole time.
The world she lived in was rural Appalachia.
Yeah, but she's going into a different part of the same world. But it's the same as Harry Potter. It's all of this is existing in parallel. It's all the same world, even though there's something different in this other part of it.
I love how class structure right there, Anna, was the same as class structure is the same as magic. Sorry, Anna, I'm cutting you off.
There is a scientific study that shows that when we have to learn new and different things, it creates new pathways in our brain. So we're less likely to get Alzheimer's because we have redundant paths so that we can still think. So all these people are simply enhancing their brains and learning to live longer.
I think that would be pretty amazing as a novel idea that, somebody is starting to show symptoms of Alzheimer's or they've gotten a CAT scan or PET scan or something that says hey, your pathways are degrading a little bit. So we're going to shove you into a brand new world to extend your lifespan.
That's a novel idea. I like it. I like what Emily says in the chat, the world being isekai versus the plot being isekai. And I think that really gets to the core of the difference between me and Anna is this idea that for a purist definition of isekai, you need a literal world in the story to be a different setting. And in my very loose definition, the plot itself can be isekai.
Aha.
By learning new things. All right. Star Wars, we mentioned it earlier. Is it isekai?
A different world, huh? There's planets all over the place.
He does go to literal different worlds. That's true.
But they're all the same universe, the same possibility of the source.
But he goes from being a farmer on a desert planet to being a warrior, interstellar warrior. So that's quite a change, I think.
That's also just like the fish out of water hero's journey. He left on a quest and he basically went from his, little mountain town, desert town to a new, very different, big city mouse society and realized that there was a bunch of terrible big city mouse problems.
He discovers.
I mean, it's the same as the Hunger Games in terms of going and experiencing new things and stuff. And so, yeah, I would not think this is isekai.
He discovers magic. He learns magic.
But
Harry Potter.
him learning it doesn't make it exist. It already existed in his world, so it's
so
not.
Did Hogwarts.
Source is strong.
Yeah, I know exactly. And so I don't think Harry Potter's isekai either.
Source is strong in this one.
I'm a little actually on the fence with this one because he's learning he learns magic, but a lot of the skills he actually uses most often are skills that he already had, right? So he already knew how to fly planes or whatever they are, the
pilot
ships. He was a pilot. Thank you. Ian taking a hard left turn and saying the truth is nothing is isekai.
Where does the word isekai come from?
It's a Japanese word meaning other world.
Thanks.
Once we're all isekai, no one will be. All right, Sean and I argued about this one before we even came into this meeting. So One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, which when Sean heard I was doing Everything is Isekai, he brought this up as an example to shame me, but I feel it is. So One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. I'm just going to call it
everything. Yeah.
Jack Nicholson's character, who I am absolutely blanking on what his real name is, both in the book and in the movie, is taken to a mental institution, which for him is a completely novel experience. He has absolutely no idea how it works at first, and is testing the rules of it and learning how to navigate within its structure. And I argue that is its own form of isekai. It might as well be a foreign planet.
Everything anybody does once they're there is interpreted as nuts. You could be anybody could be perfectly fine, and once they're in there, everything they do is interpreted as a sign of whatever, of their pathology.
It is a pretty,
it's so tragic,
dark take on the mental health crisis. Now,
what is that movie about the girl in a mental institution from like
Sucker Punch?
Yes, Sucker Punch. So that would be like the isekai version of a mental institution. Yeah,
it's a visually stunning movie. Hafsa says weak isekai, 5 out of 10. I like this new rating system. Amount of isekai. All right, Jane Eyre.
I was thinking of that one, but she kind of goes back to where she was.
First of all, Jane Eyre is one of my favorite books. If I could reread any book for the first time again, it would be Jane Eyre. Absolutely stunning. But yeah, I'm gonna go with weak isekai, but isekai plot. She goes into a rich person's house, and more importantly, when she runs away from home and ends up living out on the more in the plains area. That is the true portal isekai, where she's going to a new world.
Plot isekai.
Plot isekai.
But then she goes back to her beloved husband. What's his name? Rob.
Her not husband, who she eventually marries, but that she's a different person then. So it's a true sort of hero's journey where
he's a different person too. He's blind. She gets to be in charge of everything.
It is a hero's journey in the sense that she goes away and returns changed, and her world is different because of that.
I gotta say, I never liked the ending of Jane Eyre.
Because she goes back to him.
She goes back to him, and then she just has to be his nursemaid for the rest of his life.
Yeah, that's kind of blah.
Yeah.
No, it's really horrible.
I liked it, but I'm a big romance person. I'm a romantic.
Yes.
I will romance everything.
It's so romantic to become his nursemaid, and he's blind. Okay.
God believe in love, Anne.
I do believe in love.
All right. Well, that is the end of our game and the end of my presentation. I'm Daphne Strasert. I am an editor for Tomeworks. You can find me everywhere online as Daphne the Writer, and you can find me also at tomeworksedits.com and daphnestrasert.com. Yeah. So if you want to chat about this some more, you can go find me somewhere on Twitter, Instagram, etc.
Daphne the Writer, daphnestrasert.com. And you are beautiful.
Thank you. I hope you guys had fun. Is everything really isekai? Probably not, but it's fun to go through the thought experiment anyway.
Thank you.
It was great fun.
Fascinating.
Great. Thanks, Daphne.
And next week, Sean's going to talk about the little things in the world that bigly shaped what we are reading today.
Yes. And let me, as you have your final slide up there, Daphne, say this, which is just a little preview for next week, which is capitalization. And capitalization in English, you capitalize the beginning of a sentence and any, formal words, but that wasn't always the case. And going back in time, and especially in Latin, it was completely different. So right around in 1700 or so, 1750, some of the romantics found an old text and they said, this is how you're supposed to capitalize. And so they started doing it where you capitalize the beginning of sentences only and names and places. But that actually was a medieval text that a guy used creating his own font. It was not an ancient Roman text at all. So there are these hilarious little things about history that have brought us to today and how we look at novels. And we're just going to see all these strange reasons why we do what we do.
Wait, in German to this day, they capitalize all the nouns.
Yes, they do. Absolutely.
That's going to be
very
fascinating.
Yeah.
In ancient times, did they capitalize anything?
There were two different ones. So you could either write in uppercase, which was not called uppercase, or in lowercase, but neither the twain shall meet. It was basically for two different ways of doing things. If you're doing script, that like flows across the page, and that was what we call lowercase. And if you're doing like very large letters that you need to see from far away, that was uppercase, but it wasn't called uppercase. Both of those words come from a totally different place, and I will not worry about telling you what that is now.
Uppercase and lowercase, doesn't that come from the printing?
Yeah. Okay. You know it. So from the printing press and where they kept the different letters. Absolutely. In the upper part or in the lower part?
I do. I wanted to say that I came in late, but I enjoyed this session and the discussion, and it made me smile. I was looking up all these particular more information as you guys were talking. So what I have come away with is basically a smile, a different way of looking at describing genres in writing, not just from the perspective of the American sense of things, but to incorporate different words and different perspectives. The hero's journey is basically just something that my take on it, something that people use in order to teach people how to write a form in terms of script writing and things of that nature. And some of it's held up. We've moved on from like using Aristotle's themes about how we should write to something that will be the next thing around the world. So Isekai in there, why not? I love the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Cece. I hope you had a great time.
Cece. Where is she?
Okay, everyone. Unless you have any other questions, we are going to end it there for the week, and we hope to see you back next time.
Thank you.